Today's video, we'll talk about Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney unveils a decade-long plan to massively expand military and defense-related spending. Welcome to inewschannel, your source for clear, reliable updates from around the world. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an important story. Canada is preparing for one of the most consequential defense transformations in its modern history. Speaking in Montreal, Prime Minister Mark Carney outlined a sweeping, decade-long plan that will reshape how the country funds, builds, and governs its military capabilities. At its core, the strategy is about more than weapons or budgets. It is about independence, resilience, and redefining Canada's role in an increasingly unstable world. Over the next 10 years, the federal government plans to channel unprecedented resources into national defense. Roughly 180 billion Canadian dollars will be directed toward direct military procurement, while an additional $290 billion will be spent on defense-related infrastructure. Together, these investments represent one of the largest sustained defense expansions Canada has ever undertaken. But the numbers alone do not tell the full story. What makes this plan distinctive is not just how much Canada intends to spend, but where that money will go and who will benefit from it. For decades, Canada's defense posture has rested on assumptions that no longer hold. Geography, alliances, and relative global stability allowed the country to underinvest in its own military capacity while leaning heavily on partners, particularly the United States. Prime Minister Carney acknowledged this reality directly. He said Canada failed to allocate sufficient resources to defense and neglected to nurture its domestic defense industries. That long-standing approach, he argued, created vulnerabilities that are no longer acceptable and dependencies that are increasingly risky. The world Canada faces today is fundamentally different from the one that shaped its post-Cold War defense strategy. Traditional alliances are under strain, economic coercion is more common, and geopolitical competition has intensified across multiple domains, from cyberspace and artificial intelligence to supply chains and industrial capacity. In this environment, defense is no longer just about protecting borders. It is about safeguarding economic sovereignty, technological leadership, and political independence. One of the most dramatic elements of the new strategy is a commitment to fundamentally rebalance defense procurement. Historically, Canada has relied heavily on foreign suppliers, especially American firms, for military equipment and systems. Under the new plan, that pattern is set to change. The government intends to increase the share of defense contracts awarded to Canadian companies from roughly 30% today to 70% in the future. This represents a seismic shift in procurement philosophy and signals a deliberate effort to rebuild domestic industrial capacity. To support this goal, the strategy proposes designating certain Canadian defense firms as long-term strategic partners. These companies would receive preferential access to research funding, capital investment support, and export assistance, allowing them to scale up production and compete internationally. Priority sectors include aerospace, advanced manufacturing, ammunition, autonomous systems, and drone technologies, areas viewed as critical to both national security and future economic growth. Beyond national security, the government is positioning defense investment as a major economic engine. Officials estimate that the strategy will generate approximately $125 billion in economic benefits and support the creation of around 125,000 jobs across the country. These jobs are expected to span a wide range of skill levels and industries, from advanced engineering and software development to skilled trades and infrastructure construction. The aim is to ensure that defense spending strengthens regional economies and contributes to long-term industrial resilience. Particular attention is being paid to sectors already affected by global trade tensions. Canadian steel and aluminum producers, for example, have been hit hard by foreign tariffs. Under the new strategy, these industries could receive support to modernize and adapt their facilities for defense-related production. The timing of Canada's defense reset is not accidental. The strategy directly reflects changes in the global political landscape, particularly shifting U.S. foreign and trade policies. Washington has increasingly pressured its allies to boost military spending, even as it imposes tariffs and pursues more unilateral trade measures. For Canada, this has exposed the risks of relying too heavily on a single partner for both security and industrial supply chains. The strategy also acknowledges a broader erosion of the international order. It references the retreat from traditional alliances and the reemergence of territorial ambition and power politics, trends that many policymakers believed were relics of the past. In this context, defense self-reliance is no longer seen as optional. It is viewed as a prerequisite for credible diplomacy and stable alliances. Canada's plan aligns with its long-term commitments to NATO. The government is working toward meeting the alliance's benchmark of allocating 5% of gross domestic product to defense and related infrastructure by 2035. By setting clear targets and timelines, officials hope to send a strong signal to investors, manufacturers, and international partners that Canada is serious about rebuilding its defense capacity. The government also aims to increase Canadian defense exports by 50%, positioning domestic firms as suppliers not just to the Canadian Armed Forces, but to allied militaries around the world. As part of this outward-looking approach, Canada has joined Europe's large-scale rearmament fund, further integrating its defense industry into transatlantic supply networks while still seeking greater autonomy. Despite the emphasis on independence, Canadian leaders are careful to stress that this strategy does not signal a break with the United States. Rather, it reflects an effort to recalibrate the relationship. Prime Minister Carney described the current dynamic as one of dependency, something he believes must evolve. Strategic autonomy, in his words, does not mean isolation. It means having enough strength and capacity to engage as an equal partner rather than a junior one. This balancing act is especially visible in discussions around continental defense. Talks with Washington are ongoing regarding the next phase of North American air defense, potentially involving expanded missile defense systems. While some technical questions remain unresolved, Canadian officials say cooperation remains constructive. Participation, they emphasize, will be guided by Canada's national interests. Ambitious strategies often falter at the implementation stage, and the government is keenly aware of that risk. To accelerate decision-making and reduce bureaucratic delays, Canada has established a new defense investment agency focused on speeding up procurement. While industry leaders have welcomed the move, some argue that faster processes must be backed by enforceable timelines. Long procurement cycles can be financially devastating, especially for smaller firms that lack the cash reserves to wait years for contracts. Defense Minister David McGuinty has acknowledged these concerns. He argues that change is already underway, pointing to recent procurement decisions, such as narrowing the submarine fleet competition to 2 bidders in a matter of months rather than years, as evidence of a new pace. According to McGuinty, the message to government departments is clear. Defense procurement now operates under a different set of expectations, with urgency, financing, and workforce development aligned toward a clear mission. One of the most striking developments has been the response from Canada's financial sector. McGuinty recently met with major banks and venture capital firms, a rare engagement for a defense minister, and was surprised by the level of enthusiasm. Investors, he said, arrived prepared with detailed analyses of market opportunities and a clear understanding of the barriers holding the sector back. Among their concerns were unpredictable export rules and regulatory uncertainty, issues the government says it has begun addressing. For financial institutions, defense is increasingly seen not just as a public obligation, but as a long-term growth sector tied to advanced technology and global demand. Industry leaders broadly agree that the government's approach represents a fundamental shift. Executives from major defense firms describe a surge in activity and engagement, unlike anything they have seen before. At the same time, there is caution. Contracts must materialize quickly enough to sustain momentum, particularly for smaller companies that operate on tight margins. Industry associations warn that without rapid procurement, even well-designed strategies risk undermining the very firms they aim to support. Not everyone is convinced the strategy goes far enough. Some technology leaders argue that Canada still lacks a clear framework for managing defense-related intellectual property. Historically, Canadian innovations, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, have often migrated abroad, particularly to the United States. Critics say that without stronger rules governing standards and IP ownership, Canada risks repeating that pattern. Supporters of the strategy counter that new mechanisms linking research, commercialization, and procurement could help keep innovation at home. A newly proposed Science and Research Defense Advisory Council is intended to bridge that gap between universities, industry, and the military. Opposition parties remain skeptical, arguing that Canada has seen ambitious defense plans before that failed to translate into action. They insist that credibility will depend not on documents, but on contracts signed, facilities built, and capabilities delivered. For now, the government maintains that the groundwork has been laid for a lasting transformation. Canada's defense strategy marks a decisive turn away from decades of complacency. It reflects a recognition that security, economic strength, and technological leadership are inseparable in the modern world. If successful, the plan could redefine Canada's defense industry and reduce strategic vulnerabilities, positioning the country as a more equal partner on the global stage. But success will depend on execution, on whether procurement accelerates, investments flow, and domestic firms are given the tools to compete and thrive. The next decade will determine whether this strategy becomes a turning point, or another missed opportunity in Canada's long and complicated relationship with defense and sovereignty. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back with more updates soon.